All right, so hey, good morning, AP Europeans. The purpose of this video, we are going to take a look at Unit 3 on absolutism. Specifically, we're going to look at the absolutist power that is Spain in the 17th century. And we'll talk about how their influence, or maybe lack of influence, is actually going to have an impact on the European balance of power. Here we go. Okay, so the last time we really talked about Spain, it was in Unit 2, and it was King Charles the First, who was also the Holy Roman Emperor. He was considered the most powerful person in Europe during the bulk of his reign, even though he did have some problems kind of maintaining religious control across the European continent. By the time you get into through Charles's reign through the 16th century and even into his son's reign, Philip II, this is the golden age for Spain. In the 16th century, that is in the 1500s, Spain is bringing in all the riches coming in from New World gold and New World wealth, and they are kind of maintaining that rich and powerful sort of element to it. As a sign of that rich and powerful element, they add on like the show of wealth and power. There's the Escorial Palace in Spain. This is actually when we talked about France, we talked about the palace at Versailles. This is kind of like the role model influence that Louis XIV will kind of put into things when he is going to build the palace at Versailles. This is a huge palace complex. It's got the walls around it. It's got the beautiful towers in between. It's a show of the power and wealth for what Spain really has. But this is really just going to change by the time you get into the 17th century. There's a period of like steady economic decline that goes on with this. So through the 17th century, the two Philips here, Philip III and Philip IV. This is the son and grandson of Philip II. So we got a lot of Philips all of a sudden. They are really, I mean, there's nothing against them so far as an absolute power is concerned, but they're the kings of Spain during a time period where there is a steady economic decline. As other Western European countries are seeing a growth of their middle class, a growth of a merchant class that's going on, Spain really sees the opposite. There's so much focus they've had for a couple of generations on just bringing wealth over from the New World that their economic development on the home front is just not really there. This gets even worse for the Spanish economy when they start having decreasing trade with the colonies. After the defeat of the Spanish Armada in 1588, England is going to become more dominant over the course of the next generation or so, more dominant and kind of establishing and maintaining that Atlantic Ocean trade to the Americas. And the decline in the Spanish trade is going to be, well, kind of a real detriment overall. That lack of money comes in, combined with the changing nature of European warfare, means that there's going to be an inflation because there's still some just money coming in without economic growth. But the taxes that they have to put on, they are taxing more people, trying to tax more people, but there's a shrinking middle class. And these are the people that will be paying the taxes. So you try to tax fewer people at a point in time where you need more taxes because prices are going up. And just economically, it is a weakening position that Spain's going to have overall. On the political and military side of this, already just mentioned the Spanish Armada in 1588, and then the 30 Years' War ending in 1648. These are a couple of like real serious defeats for Spain against England. Spanish Armada is against England, but is also against the weather. But the 30 Years' War, the Holy Roman Empire is the big loser on this, but Spain is also going to take some significant losses here. By 1659, the Treaty of the Pyrenees ends an ongoing conflict between Spain and France, which kind of ends part of the treaty negotiations is a marriage of Louis XIV's grandson going into, or his future grandson, going to marry into the um, Habsburg royal family. Uh, Excuse that bell in the background. But by the time you get into the later part of the 17th century, King Charles II of Spain takes over as the monarch. When he dies without any children, this leads to the War of Spanish Succession, which gets us to the Treaty of Utrecht, which is kind of another, maybe a smaller turning point than Treaty of Westphalia back in 1648. This is the treaty that ends this War of Spanish Succession. But what it really does for Spain, it kind of represents an element of dependence on Spain, economic dependence on other countries, England, France, Netherlands, for some economic assistance or just trade with those foreign goods coming in there. But the Treaty of Utrecht also kind of ushers in an era of dependence where Spain is going to be dependent on, like, to a certain extent, other royal families. They're a weakening country in Europe, which kind of makes them an anomaly over there on the western side of things. And we'll have to kind of take a look at how we could compare Spain into some of the new upcoming countries in the 17th and 18th century, like Russia, but also Austria and Prussia. So overall, you've got Spain on the decline. It's kind of like not a great example of an absolutist power kind of having control. It's also a good example here of how the balance of power can be affected when you have one country that is just weakening and withering away. Thanks for listening.